Most people look at the Death Note and see a supernatural murder weapon. I look at it and see a complex legal system that governs the boundary between the human world and the Shinigami realm. The brilliance of Light Yagami wasn't just that he was smart. It was that he treated these rules like a lawyer finding loopholes in a contract. He weaponized the obscure subclauses of these laws to dismantle the world's greatest detectives. Today, we are breaking down every single rule, including the critical anime-only distinctions and the specific mechanics that allowed for the series' most insane gambits. To understand the game, you must first understand the fundamental laws of execution. The absolute foundation of everything is the name and face rule. It seems simple, but it's actually a safety mechanism preventing mass accidental casualties. Without requiring the user to picture the specific face of the victim, writing a common name like John Smith would essentially wipe out thousands of people instantly. This requirement is what forces Light to constantly seek visual confirmation, turning information warfare into a literal matter of life and death. This is why L's primary defense, simply hiding his face, rendered the most powerful weapon in the universe useless. The note refuses to function on ambiguity. Then you have the execution timer. Once a name is written, you have exactly 40 seconds before the default heart attack occurs. This specific duration dictates Light's entire reaction speed throughout the series. When he's cornered, he knows he has a less-than-minute window to act, write, and manipulate the outcome. It's not random. It's a hard constraint that defines the pacing of his godhood. Here is where it gets technical. There is a clause stating that if a name is misspelled 4 times, that person becomes immune to the Death Note effectively forever. Now, you might think, why didn't Light just intentionally misspell his own name to gain immunity? Because the rules anticipate that exploit. If the owner intentionally misspells the name 4 times to avoid killing someone or to grant immunity, the owner dies, and the victim remains vulnerable. It's a game over state triggered by trying to cheat the system. The Shinigami King clearly didn't want humans gaming the immunity clause. We need to talk about the hierarchy of death causes. If you don't specify a cause, the note defaults to a heart attack. This isn't just a convenient fallback. It's the mechanism that allowed Light to create the Kira signature. By letting the default rule take over, he created a supernatural calling card that screamed, "This isn't natural causes," to the entire world. If the note defaulted to random accidents or aneurysms, the deaths would look like statistical noise, and L never would have found a pattern to investigate. Finally, there's the suicide restriction. Unlike many fictional kill switches that prevent self-harm, the Death Note explicitly allows for coerced suicide. The only catch is that it must fit the victim's psychological profile. You can't make a happy, mentally stable person suddenly kill themselves without context. But if the user writes a scenario where the victim enters a mental state that leads to suicide, the note accepts it. This is exactly how Light eliminated Naomi Misora. He didn't just write suicide. He forced her into a psychological corner where taking her own life became the only logical step for her character. This distinction is crucial because it means the note doesn't just control biology, it manipulates psychology, provided the outcome is plausible within the victim's existing mental framework. Once you understand how to kill, the real complexity lies in controlling exactly how they die. While the 40-second timer handles the immediate execution, the 6-minute and 40-second rule is what allows for the elaborate theater of death we see in the early episodes. This specific window is the time allotted to write the details of the death after the cause is established. This is the mechanic that allowed Light to script the entire busjacking incident involving Ray Pinber. He wasn't just hoping things would fall into place. He was utilizing a nearly 7-minute window to dictate exactly how the pieces on the board would move before they were removed from play. It turns the user from a simple executioner into a playwright giving stage directions to a dead man walking. However, these stage directions are bound by the physical possibility constraint. The Death Note cannot force a victim to perform an act that is physically impossible given their current location and abilities. Light tested this explicitly by trying to make a prisoner in a Japanese cell die in front of the Eiffel Tower within an hour. The note recognized the impossibility of the travel time and simply defaulted to a heart attack. This is a critical limitation because the Death Note cannot warp reality or teleport matter. It can only manipulate probability within the confines of physics. If you write a death that requires a flight the victim can't catch, the system rejects your narrative. This logic extends to the 23-day rule regarding disease and long-term manipulation. Generally, you cannot control a victim's actions more than 23 days in advance. If you write a date of death beyond that limit, the victim simply dies of a heart attack within the standard window. But, as with all these rules, there is a specific biological loophole. If you write a cause of death involving a chronic disease that naturally takes longer than 24 days to kill, like a specific cancer, the 23-day limit is bypassed. The note respects the biological reality of the disease over the arbitrary time limit. This allows a user to set up a death months or even years in the future, provided the pathology makes sense. Moving from the biological to the physical, we have the fragment rule. This is the mechanic that fundamentally breaks the containment of the weapon. A single torn piece of the page retains the full efficacy of the entire notebook. This seems like a minor detail until you realize it invalidates any attempt to confiscate the weapon. The potato chip scene is famous for its visual flair, but mechanically, it proves that light can conduct mass execution while the murder weapon is technically hidden inside a snack bag. Later, this allows for the hidden watch compartment trick. The power isn't in the binding, it's in the paper itself. Finally, we have the mechanics of writing ahead. The rules state you can write the cause of death first and fill in the name later. This effectively removes the 40-second delay. By pre-writing traffic accident in the book, the user creates a loaded gun. The moment a name is added to that pre-written line, the effect is instantaneous. Light used this to eradicate the FBI agents, essentially turning the notebook into a fill-in-the-blank death sentence that bypasses the time required to write out descriptions during a confrontation. Controlling death is powerful, but controlling the notebook's ownership is how Light survived L's investigation. To understand this, we have to distinguish between an owner and a holder. This isn't just semantics. It defines who is playing the game and who is just a pawn. If you simply touch the notebook, you become a holder. This grants you the ability to perceive the Shinigami, hear their voice, and see them in the room, which is exactly how the task force members were eventually able to interrogate Rim and Ryuk. However, being a holder does not bind you to the Shinigami. Only the owner is spiritually tethered to the god of death, and only the owner can make the transaction for the Shinigami Eyes. This separation allowed Light to pass the notebook around like a baton while keeping the supernatural burden and the suspicion away from his accomplices. The most exploitable aspect of ownership, however, is the memory wipe mechanic. The rules state that if you relinquish ownership of the Death Note, your memories associated with it are completely erased. This is the mechanism that fueled the Yotsuba arc. Light didn't just hide the book, he deleted his own criminal intent. By giving up ownership, he reverted to his pre-Kira psychology. This allowed him to pass lie detector tests and psychological profiling, not because he was a good actor, but because he wasn't lying. He had weaponized his own ignorance to dismantle the investigation from the inside. But the system has a restore point. The rules clarify that if a former owner touches the notebook again, all those memories flood back instantly. They don't need to regain ownership. Simple physical contact is enough to bridge the neural gap. This is the logic behind the helicopter scene where Light snatches the notebook from L's hand. In a split second, the contact restores years of memories, allowing him to kill Higuchi immediately. There is a catch here that is often overlooked. This touch-to-restore mechanic has a limit. You can only regain memories this way 6 times per notebook. If Light had been forced to drop and touch the notebook a 7th time, his memories would have remained locked away forever, leaving him permanently as the innocent version of himself. There is also a temporal boundary to this. The 490-day rule acts as a statute of limitations on ownership. If you lose the notebook or have it stolen, you must retrieve it within 490 days, roughly a year and 4 months. If this window closes, ownership is permanently severed, and the memories are gone for good. It prevents a user from stashing a notebook for decades only to return as an elderly serial killer. On a macro level, we have the saturation rule. Only 6 death notes are allowed to exist in the human world at any one time. If a 7th notebook enters the human realm, it is inert, useless paper, until one of the active 6 is destroyed or returned to the Shinigami realm. This rule is essential for world building because it creates a hard cap on the chaos. It prevents an army of Kiras from rising up and ensures that the power remains concentrated in the hands of a select few. Finally, we have to address the lending loophole. An owner can lend the notebook to a subordinate without transferring the Shinigami attachment. This allows for a proxy, like Mikami, to act as the executioner while the Shinigami remains haunting the original owner. This creates a false trail. El and Nier were tracking the Shinigami to find the killer, but the lending rule allowed Light to keep the Shinigami close while the actual murder weapon was operating miles away in someone else's hands. It bifurcates the Kira identity into two separate entities, the mind that commands and the hand that writes. While ownership grants the power to kill, the Shinigami Eyes grant the power to dominate information. This ability fundamentally shifts the genre of the conflict from a mystery to a thriller, but the cost of entry is staggering. The transaction is brutal in its simplicity. A human can trade exactly half of their remaining lifespan for the ability to see a person's true name and date of death floating above their head. Note the phrasing. It is not a flat fee of years, but a percentage of potential. If you have 60 years left, you pay 30. If you have 2 days left, you pay 1. It is a gamble on a future you cannot see, made blindly to secure power in the present. This specific cost-benefit analysis is why Light Yagami consistently refused the deal. To Light, the Death Note was a tool to build a long-term utopia where he would rule as a god for decades. Sacrificing half of that reign for the sake of convenience was, in his eyes, a bad deal. It represented a lack of strategic patience. However, for Misa Amane, whose motivations were rooted in emotion rather than ambition, the cost was irrelevant. This dichotomy defines their partnership. Light provides the longevity and the plan, while Misa provides the raw, expensive tactical data required to execute targets whose names are hidden. The strategic value of the eyes goes beyond just seeing names. There is a critical visibility limitation that serves as the series' most important identification mechanic. You cannot see the lifespan of another Death Note owner. When a user looks at a normal human, they see a name and a number. When they look at another owner, they see only the name. This visual distinction effectively functions as a supernatural identify friend or foe system. It is the only reason Misa was able to identify Light within a massive crowd in Aoyama. She wasn't looking for a killer. She was scanning for the one person in Tokyo who didn't have a visible expiration date. This rule turns the eyes into a radar for rival users, making it impossible for another Kira to hide in plain sight against an eye holder. However, the tragedy of this system is best exemplified by Misa's compounding debt. The rules state that if a user loses ownership of the notebook, they lose the eye ability and their memories, but the lifespan they traded is never refunded. It is a sunk cost in the most literal sense. Misa makes the deal with Rem, halving her life. Later, she relinquishes ownership to protect Light, losing the eyes. When she regains a notebook and her memories return, she makes the deal again with Ryuk to help Light kill L. This second transaction halves her already halved lifespan. If she originally had 60 years, the first deal dropped her to 30. The second deal dropped her to 15. The rules do not care about fairness. They only care about the transaction. Misa effectively paid 3/4 of her existence for the privilege of being Light's weapon, proving that while the notebook can kill others, the eyes slowly kill the user. The eyes are a gift from the Shinigami, but the Shinigami themselves are bound by even stricter laws. The entire hierarchy of the Shinigami realm is built on a single, unbreakable directive. They cannot intentionally extend a human's life. A Shinigami exists to harvest time, not to grant it. If a god of death uses their notebook to kill a threat specifically to save a human they care for, they are immediately penalized with erasure. They dissolve into dust, and their remaining lifespan is transferred to the human they saved. This is the only way to kill a Shinigami, and it is a rule that Light exploited with surgical precision. This brings us to the analysis of Rem's death. It wasn't simply that Rem killed L and Watari. It was the causality of the act. By killing L, Rem prevented Misa's inevitable capture and execution. Because this act fundamentally altered Misa's fate and extended her natural lifespan, the universe deleted Rem. Light didn't just defeat L. He executed the ultimate subversion of the power dynamic by maneuvering a god into a position where its only choice was to commit suicide to save Misa, effectively weaponizing its own biological programming against it. There is also the attraction rule, which dictates that a Shinigami must remain within a specific proximity to the human owner. They are effectively haunting them until death or the relinquishment of the notebook. This isn't just for narrative convenience, it's a binding law. Ryuk cannot just wander off to another continent, he is tethered to light. This proximity is what allowed L to treat the Shinigami as a suspect, knowing that if a god was present, the killer had to be within arm's reach. However, the most devastating rules in the entire series were the ones that didn't exist. The 13-day rule and the burning rule were fabrications written by Light into the notebook itself to clear his name. The fake 13-day rule stated, if the person using this notebook fails to write a new name within 13 days of the last entry, they will die. This was the checkmate. Light allowed himself to be incarcerated for weeks under L's surveillance. When he didn't die, despite not writing any names, this rule proved he couldn't be Kira. It turned the notebook from a weapon of opportunity into a cursed object that demanded constant feeding, a condition Light clearly didn't meet during his confinement. The complementary burning rule acted as the ultimate insurance policy. It stated that if the notebook were destroyed or burned, all humans who had touched it would die. This was a brilliant defensive maneuver against the police. Even if the task force suspected the notebook was dangerous, they couldn't destroy it without risking their own lives and the lives of their colleagues. It forced the detectives to preserve the murder weapon, protecting it better than Light ever could. These two fake rules created a logical stalemate that paralyzed L's investigation. L's logic was flawless, but it was based on false axioms. He was trying to solve a puzzle where the instructions had been tampered with, proving that, in the world of the Death Note, the ability to write the rules is just as powerful as the ability to write the names. These rules create a perfect cage, but they also determine the ultimate fate of the user. Ultimately, the Death Note is not a weapon of chaos, but a system of rigid logic. Victory didn't belong to the one with the deadliest power, but to the one who treated the supernatural like a legal contract. In this battle of wits, the most dangerous weapon wasn't the ability to kill, it was the audacity to manipulate the fine print of reality itself.